Right. Well, we'll get underway because there's a lot to cover tonight. So, firstly, thank you all for joining us this evening for the 5th webinar in a series to celebrate New Zealand Project Management Awareness Month. We've got nearly 200 people registered tonight, which is a record turnout and I guess testament to the lineup of panelists we've got. PMI doesn't really function without our sponsors, so we do need to acknowledge and thank them. So we need to acknowledge Millpond, who are training providers for project management qualifications. They have asked me to mention that they have got 5-day PMP and CAPM classroom courses available in both Christchurch and Auckland starting in October, if anyone's looking forward to doing that. Get into it. Quest Apartment Hotels are a big sponsor for us and provide amazing discount rates for our PMI NZ members. SODA, of course, are a big tool for portfolio project and program management. Project Management Awareness Month is also being
Sharon, you're muted.
So sorry about that. Project Management Awareness Month is also being supported by the Engineering New Zealand and the New Zealand Construction Industry Council. So we thank them for their support. My slides have just gone a bit wonky, but there's 2 other announcements that I wanted to tell you about. One is once we're finished with Project Management Awareness Month in September, we are heading straight into the first ever New Zealand and Australian combined virtual project management conference. The website and registrations and list of speakers are now available. And then in November, we have the Project Management Awards nationally here in New Zealand, and nominations are currently open for those, so we encourage you to submit your nominations. So without further ado, we'll hand over to our president, Kosam. Take it away.
Thanks very much there, Sharon, for the warm-up to the event. I won't take much time because we really want to hear what the panelists have to say. I'll just introduce Mike Roberts, who is going to be the moderator today. And Mike is an accomplished coach, trainer, and as well as a very experienced practitioner himself. So he will be moderating some heavyweights tonight. Good luck with that, Mike, and over to you. Thank you.
Thanks, Kosam. Kia ora koutou all. Welcome along to a big event tonight to discuss everything about program management and portfolio management. Hope you're all in the right room. People are coming in as we speak, so Sharon, if you can just keep an eye on that and admit when they get in, that would be great. Just some general housekeeping. Please just keep your mics on mute, and that way we can sort of minimize any sort of background distractions. It'd be great if you can all turn your cameras on as well, so we can all actually see real live people. There's nothing worse than presenting online and seeing a whole bunch of black boxes with white names on them. So if you do have a webcam, and you don't mind being seen, that'd be fantastic if you can please turn those on. Now, what we'd like you to do is use the chat feature within Zoom here. So at the bottom of your screen, there'll be a little chat icon. If you click on that, first thing is we'd like to just share what your current role is and how many years industry experience you've got. That will allow our panelists tonight just to get a bit of a feel of who's in the room and how to pitch their messages. And secondly, also use the chat feature to ask some questions. So I'll be reviewing the chat window all the way through the session today, making notes of the questions, and they'll be asking that towards the end. I've got a bunch of questions pre-lined up to ask to get us rolling, but then I'll be looking forward to you guys sharing your own questions, which I'll be asking on your behalf. So it's 7:04 now. We're going to wrap things up at 8 o'clock. So we have just over 55 minutes to share as much as we possibly can about program portfolio management. So what I'd like to do first is introduce our speakers. So in no particular order, I'm going to start in clockwise based on who I can see first. Ian Fraser, could you please introduce yourself? You're on mute there, Ian. Great start. There we go. You're away now.
For those who can lip read, well done. For those who can't, hopefully you can hear me now. Thank you, Mike. Look, my name's Ian Fraser. I have a modified Invercargill accent, as some of you are well aware. I live in Wellington, semi-retired, former CEO, PMO manager, EPMO manager, project director, and a few other things thrown in for boot. Most recently, author of a couple of business books, a third one on the way, which keeps me busy in different parts of the world, doing some speaking engagements and training stuff with business people, as well as being a independent director on a couple of boards of directors. So that's probably enough about me. Thank you.
Super. Thank you, Ian. Keith, over to you, please.
Oh, okay. I always find this a little bit embarrassing. I think I spent the whole of my career responsible for projects. I think the first one is in 1976. The most recent one was completing the New Zealand Food Network just a month or so ago. I don't keep score, but I think it's well over 50 projects now, and every single one has been different. Most of them have been highly complex systems integration, organizational transformation, at pretty much every stage of the life cycle, from bid and proposal through to launch, through to implementation, through to retirement, as well as a few turnarounds as well. So in that, I've been a project manager, a project director, a program manager. I've managed portfolios. I managed Lockheed Martin in the UK, which was essentially a project management house. I've been a non-exec director, a consultant, a teacher at UCL and the University of Auckland, and a mentor. So I think I've covered all the bases. So hopefully that gives a bit of an introduction anyway.
Super. Thank you, Keith. John, could we please hear from you, please?
Good evening and welcome, everybody. Yeah, my name is John Punch. Been in New Zealand since 2009. Prior to that, if you can tell from my accent, I'm an Irish man that immigrated over to New Zealand. Have experience, probably about 20 years experience in projects in different spaces. So worked in electronics, medical devices, where had some really interesting stuff around artificial hearts with a company called Ventricore, and also manufacturing of stents with a company called Boston Scientific. When I came to New Zealand, then I worked in pharmaceuticals with Schering Plough, looked after validation projects down there, and actually I think they're now called Merck. With the last 10 years or so, I've been working in the dairy industry for Fonterra as a project manager, and recently there, within the last 4 years, I've been stepped up into a program manager role, and at the moment I look after a program called Dairycraft that teaches people dairy processing, packing and logistics, and actually helps them to get qualified in those areas.
Great, thanks, John. And the fourth person on our panel tonight is Shane. Over to you, Shane.
Kia ora tātou, ko Shane Hasty tēnei. Thank you for having me here. I'm the current role is the Director of Community Development for IC Agile, the International Consortium for Agile. And I bring the Agile perspective, I suppose, to the panel. I've been deeply involved in software projects, project management, and programs of work. I've not often worked truly at the portfolio level, but done a lot of program level work with multiple parallel projects. And am one of the authors of the book #No Projects, moving towards a culture of continuous value for knowledge worker products. And been doing this stuff for 30 mumbled years. 15 of which as an educator, teaching other people how to do this stuff.
Super, thanks, Shane. All right, just a reminder, please do put your questions in the chat window and I'll be gathering those throughout. Just to summarize the sorts of people we hear, just what we have here tonight. We have GMs, we have program managers, we have senior project managers, we have general managers, we've got coordinators in here, so a big range of talent in the room here tonight. So I think it's probably good to start off with some I guess, definitions, maybe some explanations of what exactly is program management and portfolio management, and maybe how that compares or differs to project management. So I'm going to hand over to Keith here, who's got a couple of slides and a bit of an analogy to share with us. Keith, you're on mute there. Keith, you're on mute there, mate.
The time word of the year will be "you're muted."
I'm going to just flick him a note to unmute. There we go,
Yeah.
Keith. We can hear.
How's that?
We can hear you now.
Okay. So, yes, I thought it would be interesting just to compare and contrast the role of a project manager with that of an orchestra leader. We've all seen orchestra leaders and we think it's a pretty challenging job. Their job is to bring out the talent and make it perform. And hopefully that rings a few bells with the audience this evening. It's their job to keep to the script and to keep the tempo and the pace and to sort of bring in resources as and when required to achieve the objectives. And those objectives are to make sure the outcome delights the audience, the stakeholders. So that's a pretty challenging job, but it's quite easy compared to a project manager, because everyone in the consult hall is there for a particular purpose. They have the same shared objectives and expectations, but as we all know, that's not always the case with a project. There's always different points of view. So sometimes it feels like herding cats. The other big difference with an orchestra is everybody gets a chance to rehearse. But a project manager is largely faced with a task that no one's tackled before, with an entirely new team and the least amount of knowledge about that particular program. And the project audience and its objectives can change too. I'm sure we've all experienced requirements creep. In our analogy, you start with Mozart and maybe end up with jazz, which is a pretty difficult thing to try and manage. So, let's see. So the second chart here sort of reflects the fact that as project managers, sometimes we have major subcontracts to run as well. And they have their own project manager, they have their own orchestra leader, and they're running things in their own right. And sometimes you have different locations, different set of priorities, and your job as the sort of prime contractor is to try and keep it all under control, keep tabs on what's going on, manage the culture, manage the communication. And as you move into portfolios, all sorts of different orchestras, they all need to be coordinated to achieve a common outcome. All of these things are moving at a different pace, lots of moving parts, different scores, different objectives, highly complex. And very often they're owned by different companies with, again, different corporate priorities, different techniques and different cultures. And as per the last slide, not everybody is pulling in a different direction, not everybody is pulling in the same direction, and everybody works a little bit differently. So I think as well as the skills of a project manager, a portfolio manager needs the skills of big picture strategy, systems thinking, the big picture stuff, but at the same time, attention to detail, because very often the devil's in the detail. And the ability to join all those moving parts together. So there's a degree of salesmanship, influencing skills, negotiation, building a common cause, diplomacy, collaboration, all to keep it sold and navigate the entire organization through the inevitable problems that will crop up. So it's more than a headful, much more than a headful. So it needs to be supported in many cases by a PMO, a design authority, transformation team. And I'm amazed I got through that in just a couple of minutes, because I could talk for hours on all this stuff. But I'll draw a halt there and hope that provides a solid basis for a good discussion. So thanks very much, everybody, and thanks for having me along this evening.
Thanks, Keith. If we can just get you to stop sharing your screen for a second.
Oh, sure.
Magic, there we go. Ian, do you care to sort of extend that sort of definition of program management and portfolio management? Any sort of more words to add from your end? Oh, sorry, again, you're on mute there, Ian.
How's that? Can you hear me now?
We can.
Lovely, thank you. Thanks for that, Mike. Yeah, look, I think he set the scene really, really well indeed, and I think one of the things that will probably come out of this discussion as we flow into it is the different interpretations, and if I may suggest, the amount of confusion that exists between various terms, whatever it might be, and whether it's project, program of work, portfolio, PMO, EPMO, project office, project controls. And I think there's a huge amount of confusion. So I think this particular discussion is timely. And as I said, hopefully the discussion as it begins to flow will focus on things. To me, I think, however, and if I may focus on portfolio management is different. It is not program of work delivery. It is not project management delivery. Portfolio management is different in so much that it needs to be organizational performance orientated. And for that matter, it needs to be bolted together with something else. And in my view, that needs to be bolted with some sort of concept of value management, not the financial ratio stuff that's the popular standards that's been trotting around for a few years. I think that's just awful. It's revenue divided by cost gives you some notion of value. Well, if you're a bean counter, then that's maybe important. Yes. And look, I'm Scottish, so money is important to me. And of course, money is important to everybody in the project space, but it's not the only notion of value. And I think in this modern world that we live in. So to me, I think portfolio management is more business orientated and should be business orientated and should be assisting very senior leaders plan and guide their organizations through not just the current scenario that we all find ourselves in, but both the short-term and mid-term strategies that our organization wishes to pursue and or adopt and pursue as a consequence. So yeah, that's just my opening kind of remarks, Mike. Thank you.
Thanks, Ian. So portfolio management a lot more strategic focus, whereas project management more maybe a bit more tactical.
Well, and that's not to say one's better than the other, Mike, and it's a very important point to make. Thank you for the prompt, actually. It doesn't mean that one's better than the other. Perhaps one gets paid a bit more being a portfolio person, but I think absolutely the focus on portfolio management needs to be strategic. And again, as the conversation flows, and hopefully I'll get a chance to support those comments with some data a little bit later on. But yeah, thank you.
Cool, thanks, Ian. All right, next sort of, I guess, place I want to head to is sort of trying to get into these roles. Say you're a project manager today, how do we get into program management? If you're a program manager today, how do you get into portfolio management? Is that direction? Does it go project, program, portfolio? Can we skip program management and go straight to portfolio? How does that work? So, John, give me your views on how to sort of, if people in the room are wanting to get their careers there in the next 6 months or the next 6 years, how would we go about that?
Yeah, thanks, Mike. Look, I definitely think you need to have some experience in delivery of projects and have a fair few projects under your belt to understand how all of that works, because ultimately you're still going to be working with project managers or directing project managers. So it'd be quite hard to do it without that background experience. And the difference, I think, being transitioning up from a project manager to a program manager is where you have to do some more of that strategic thinking as well. So if you look at the analogy Keith used a while ago about the orchestra, COVID has probably come in and said, actually, we're not just playing music now, we're changing the whole tune, right? So when you think about that, it goes, project managers will have to, they have a very defined temporary one-off undertaking that generally are bound by cost, resource, budget, and time constraints, whereas programs are composed of several underlying or interconnected projects. So you have to think about, okay, what is the bigger picture here? Has the company strategy changed by external environments? And what do I need to, take the foot off the gas, or do I need to put the foot on other places? And that's and stakeholder management is even more so important as a program manager, simply because you have stakeholders with differing opinions, but you still need to bring it back to strategic focus and how all of those bigger pieces of work to connect together. And one of the key differences as well is as a project manager, you have a temporary team that you bring together, but over a program that could be actually much longer term, and you have to do a lot more people care and developing your people and looking after them. And they're the key differences, I think, Mike, that you would see between a project and a program manager.
Thanks, John. Shane, your thoughts on that?
In terms of the project and program management, very, very much so. And John's got that spot on in terms of the more the breadth of looking across multiple parallel projects or initiatives. And I am an advocate for more longer term, particularly again in that knowledge worker environment, keeping people, keeping teams together. One of the challenges that we face is the temporary nature of some of the work. Now, there are certainly circumstances where a temporary nature makes a whole lot of sense, but let's think about it in terms of the context. And then stepping to a portfolio level, there's a need to be able to have a systems thinking view. Ian and Keith both touched on the financial risk aspect to portfolios, the value management, very, very important, and being able to understand what value means to a wide variety of different stakeholders and make the trade-offs. Portfolios are very much about the choices that you're making to do, to not do, to stop, to start. And that might mean that down in the program and project level, we're actually causing a fair amount of pain, because this thing that I cared so deeply about is no longer relevant in the broader organizational context. And we take the situation most of the world is in at the moment with COVID. How many projects have had to come to an absolute grinding halt because we're making those hard trade-offs at that portfolio level? And the portfolio management is very much about thinking in those trade-offs, those contrasts, the choices, and making often very hard decisions.
You think, just on that note, Shane, and I don't mean this to be a loaded question, but are organizations typically good at making those hard decisions from a portfolio point of view?
No, because most of the time it's not made looking at some sort of a value model, and most of the time it's the hippo, the highest paid person in the organization, gets to their pet initiative is the one that's going to get the focus, going to get the funding, going to get the preferential treatment. And no, I think organizations as a whole do it pretty badly.
So let's tease that out a bit more in terms of focusing on the value. You know, how do we come up with a value model? What are the sort of measures and metrics we should be looking at versus what we are currently looking at today in business? Shane, do you want to answer that before I hand it over to somebody else?
Okay.
I mean, it's a hard one, right? Because
it's a really hard one. One of the
all
things
organizations are different. All projects, all industries are different. So it's quite hard to come up with one. But what's your advice on coming up with a system, some metrics around value?
I'm going to do the consultant answer, of course. It depends.
Yeah. There's
a vast range. And you've got to be able to look at the organization's appetite for risk, and on the one hand, the capabilities within the organization, the capabilities within the ecosystem that the organization is part of. And then there's, if I may share my screen for a moment, there is actually quite a nice value pyramid. Now, this is from a Harvard Business Review article that looks at value in terms of a single product, but you can start to extrapolate that across multiple initiatives, multiple products, multiple streams of work and projects. So functional, emotional, life-changing, social impact. How often can we take into account these different aspects of value. And then we've got to have hard conversations about how we weigh them up against each other as well. So that's one possible beginning of a model for value.
Thanks, Shane.
The traditional iron triangle is a set of constraints. It's not a set of value.
Cool, I like that. That's good. And it's also good to see in that value model the sort of the emotional values, which is so very important for us as people. And like, I know you've sort of touched on the group already so far, but we'll come back to this point, I'm sure, around the importance of people and their emotions. Keith, what's your thoughts on focusing on value, and how do we determine what value is as an organization?
Okay, well, I think it's an interesting question. In my experience, sometimes the initial business case is quite crude, flawed, not very comprehensive. It's sometimes based on, simplistic finance or a particular technology, or maybe a market share or something of that nature. And I don't think that it's thought through as well as it should be in terms of the implications, in terms of the trade-offs, in terms of the downside, for example, in terms of redundancies, employment, blah, blah, blah. So I don't think those things are always evaluated to the extent they should be before the project even gets off the ground. And I think my observation over the years is that there aren't particularly good mechanisms for reviewing the project against the original business plan. You kind of kick the thing off, it's launched, and the assumption is, like a little bit like fire and forget, this thing is going to wend its way and achieve all those objectives, and it's going to, come to delivery in 2 years, 5 years, 10 years, whatever it is, and achieve all those goals. But very often those goals, those objectives, those values that you set out to achieve in the first place, kind of drift off as you make decisions on the way through. So that's just an observation. So I think, Shane's got some really good values there, and I think, we're all very used to managing the timescales, the milestones, the risk, and all those other sorts of things. But at the end of the day, you have to achieve outcomes, and you have to define those outcomes as well as you can before you start, and understand what the downside might be, and what the windows might be, the acceptability as you go through the project, program, portfolio.
Great, thanks, Keith. And Ian, I know this is a section on your book around portfolio management. Care to add some notes on that?
Yeah, look, I kind of like the notion that Keith just touched on there about, in order to give delivery teams, both program of work, excuse me, leaders as well as project leaders, the best optimal chance to be successful, irrespective of they're working within, the constraint triangle that Shane touched on, or some other manner. I think still, to me, the overarching limitation for those for success in those teams is back in the organization and in the organizational leadership. To me, again, that's where I think portfolio needs to embrace some element of value management. And prior to putting that book together that you referenced, Mike, thank you for the plug, I did extensive research, and I found there was a shocking gap in terms of the understanding of value in the modern workplace. There was, I think, lots of good reference to a lot of thinking that perhaps we did in the past, 10, 20 years ago. But I think today we see a very different world, a VUCA influence world, where we need to move at pace. Sometimes we need to deal with lots of ambiguity. We need to be very adaptive and very nimble in terms of our approaches. And in terms of leadership, as I think Shane touched on earlier in his opening comments, that introduces huge risk to the organization, or potentially huge risk, which I think takes very brave leadership to embrace that and impart the notion of driving for value and hunting for value in a culture, into a culture that allows people to perhaps fail, learn from that, but pick up and get going again. I think that's super critical in the next decade going forward, in my view. To me, I think, for what it's worth, a modern view on value needs to be a blend and a balance between internal mechanisms and drivers and needs to the organization versus external. So Keith and I share a kind of similar background, big mega project stuff. back in the day, you know, the whole notion of being profitable was about managing a time frame, a scope of work, huge amounts of risk. When in one of my examples of 900 people working on a project every single shift, 3 shifts per day. It was fantastic, actually, but gosh, I think I blame that for my lack of hair in the front, actually. But anyway, going back to the value thing, I think part of my research sort of uncovered an Economist Intelligence Unit article that said that something like 74% of all strategies fail. For those of you who read PMI and PMI's research, PMI sort of typically talk about, and I know APM in the UK do very similar, talk about, you know, anything between 25% and 30% of all program and project initiatives fail. Well, to me, you know, most of the commentary seems to be around addressing the 25 to 30%. To me, the big elephant in the room is, gosh, if we've got 74% of strategies failing, perhaps we need to put some attention there. And I think by building in a value management framework that has 4 quadrants to it: value to customers, obviously, value to staff and brand. So that's that internal perspective. You know, that's the cultural stuff, the purpose statement, financial value, of course, and some sort of, you know, short to mid-term strategic element in there. Balancing across that and then recognizing there's 4 types of value that need to be sort of thought about, so that when you know, portfolio people are influencing and guiding strategic planning conversations with all those people who are dressed up very, very well, who call themselves strategists, you know, there needs to be a little, you know, touch point that says, well, wait a minute, let's just check the reality. Are we balancing our inherent value? Are we looking for added value? Are we innovative and looking for new value? And all of the question is, how soon can we deliver that value in terms of again, meeting short-term needs versus longer-term needs. So again, the brave leader, whether it's a PMO, an EPMO, a program of work, a project, a chief executive that I've had the good fortune to be, or on an independent board as an own executive. I think, Keith, I heard you say that. Whatever your role is, Mike, I think you said there was some GMs in the audience. GMs, you know, you're a big influence spot as a GM. You know, you're influencing up and down, a hugely important role. If there isn't a clear understanding of value up and down and across the organization, confusion is still going to reign, and we're still going to see those failure rates. So to me, the start point is, let's get sure and let's make sure that as an organization, we are all clear on what value is and what it means to our organization, rather than some theoretical stuff that might be on a global standard, you know. Sorry. Get that in there, Mike.
Yeah, good on you, mate. No, thanks, Ian. And while you're talking, a question came in around what's the difference between, this is from Shaquille, what's the difference between benefits and value? Look, we've heard a lot about value, and we're seeing a lot about benefits and benefits management, benefits realization from the likes of PMI and APM and Stephen Jenner through yeah. So what's your answer to that? Benefits versus value?
Thank you. I'll go very quickly, and maybe some of the others might have some comment on this too also. Look, I wrote a paper on value benefits realization 2003, just a couple of years before Gerald Bradley put out his awesome book on managing benefits, actually. To me, benefits management is part of the process of the overarching value management. So benefits management really is, to me, value capture. It's capturing and confirming that value has been captured through both project and program of work efforts. Now, project typically is CapEx only. Program of work, however, can introduce OpEx as well as CapEx. So there's, you know, a kind of different, deeper dive into benefits management associated with that. All of that comes up to allow benefits to confirm that value's been captured, and then that value management, that value management framework, yes, gets kind of reinforced. I can talk about that a bit later, Mike. But look, maybe some of the other panelists.
Yeah, thanks, Ian.
Something to add there.
John, I just sort of move on to the next question. Just keeping track of time here. Program management. So you're a program manager. What should we be focusing on in a program management role? What's important to program managers?
Yeah, look, I think what's really important is alignment to organizational goals. So when you talk about value management, it's around how can we make that happen essentially, right? So in terms of that, there are probably 3 different levels of things we could do as a business. So it's your must-dos, your core improvements, and your game-changing stuff. And essentially, we're presented with a set of problems across the spectrum, like, you know, what customer issues are we having? Are we having people issues? Is there any operational issues? Sustainability issues like our environment, compliance, and of course innovation, looking forward into the future and keeping ahead of, you know, if you're not moving forward, you're essentially going backwards. So keeping all of those in mind, it's around how do we put those programs of work together to try and generate that value. And of course, as Ian was saying, like, the benefit comes from that realized value and in the delivery, right? And as a program manager, it's really trying to establish how you can do that from a strategic point of view, what pieces of work you can do, and how do you solve the problem, right? So a project really is an endeavor to solve a problem, essentially, right? And a structured way of doing so. And the program manager then has to take that into the portfolio of projects and try to see what's the benefit versus one versus the other. Is there a sequence to make them happen, and how do they all get delivered together?
Thanks, John. And just to extend it with another question, is there's a lot of PMs in the room, and so as a program manager, what do you want from the PMs as part of your role?
Yeah, so PMs are responsible for delivering all of the objectives of a project, right? And it is to manage their individual projects and the team underneath those projects. So the PM is responsible for that project, and then the program manager is responsible for the delivery of multiples. So a program manager may have a team of PMs working for them, but it's really understanding how you connect into other projects going across the program. I think it's really critical. Often as PMs, we can just focus on solely trying to deliver our own piece of work, but without taking that bigger picture view of how things interconnect. We have to look at that bigger picture. So it's to lift up into that level of bigger picture is really going to help.
Cool, thanks, John. Keith, over to you now. I've got a question from the crowd. It's from COSAM, actually. Portfolio management, can this be managed through a PMO? Are organizations making this distinction in terms of setting up the relevant core and support structures?
Well, I think it's a good question. I think very often, you know, you can have a very, very big project or a portfolio, and all of them will be characterized by the number of interdependencies there are between the activities, and the interdependencies between the constituent projects or programs or organizations or subcontractors or communities or what have you. And I think sometimes it just becomes too much of a headful to manage all those moving parts, and you need an organization to track that, both technically, from a cost point of view, from a schedule point of view, and from a reaction, sort of managing the transformation and change in the organization that you're introducing new technology or you're attempting to change. So I think, you know, it is a big task, and I think a lot of people underestimate the amount of work that has to go into just that coordination activity. And in very technical projects, there's a lot of design work that has to be coordinated as well, because, you know, there's a lot of these projects are development projects, and things go wrong, and you have to cope with what happens when things go wrong, whether that's a redesign, a reschedule, different budget, all that kind of stuff. So it takes effort. And I think that's what the PMO does, and I think that's what the design authority does, and so on. So I think all of those have to be baked into the initial project strategy, and it has to be right sized, and there has to be a proper forward load to make sure you've got the right kind of resources there to do that. And I see there's a question there about not-for-profit organisations adopting portfolio management, and I think, you know, there's no reason why a not-for-profit organisation shouldn't adopt exactly the same disciplines as a for-profit organisation.
Thanks, Keith.
I think, Mike, if I may just add to Keith's point there, he said something really important. I think an extension of that would be portfolio management should be seen as a way of doing business, whether it's for profit or non-profit. It applies to both, but it should be seen as a way of doing business. And I think that simple sort of mantra sort of opens up immense opportunities for portfolio management to be more than perhaps it's perceived to be today. So I just wanted to add to Keith's point there. Thanks.
Thanks, Ian. It's such a vital role. Projects, programs, portfolio management. It's how businesses do change, right? If we get it right, then we get it right. If we don't, then we really don't. It's as simple as that. A question from Clarity from the group. So Emily, so is a PMO a monitor of the hard metrics, i.e. time and dollars, etc., whereas the portfolio management is monitoring values and outcomes?
Good question.
What do we think, team? Is that a fair statement? PMO, a monitor of the hard metrics, whereas the portfolio is monitoring values and outcomes.
I hope the PMO is thinking about values and outcomes as well as.
Yeah.
So there's the importance of those metrics, right? Where are those metrics taking us? Where are they leading us to?
Well,
Nice.
it's no good building something on time, on budget, on scope that actually nobody really wants. We've really efficiently solved the wrong problem. And there's been a lot of that out there.
Indeed. I mean, that might be a nice segue into the next question. This is for you, Shane. So how does Agile turn its hat to program and portfolio management? Is this a young principle around these sort of professions, or is it a big leap for us, or is it not a big leap for us? What's your views on the Agile lens?
Through an Agile lens, it's just bringing the concept of adapt and respond. How rapidly can we learn and adapt? That's what agility is, the ability of an organization to not just respond to change, but to anticipate change and take advantage of that, leverage that for competitive advantage and for organizational benefit. There are many frameworks and practices that fall broadly under that banner, but yeah, at its core, there is nothing special about portfolio management using an agile approach to product delivery. We hope that the agile delivery mechanisms allow us to make those hard decisions and good decisions quicker. If something is really efficiently solving the wrong problem, we'll kill it now, refocus that effort and funding and capability into doing something that will be better for the organization and will generate more value. I would like to add another aspect to possibly Ian's four quadrants of value, and I would put societal and social value there as something that we should all be thinking about and should be becoming more responsible for. So that's just a slight side.
Thanks, Shane. And how do we as an organization get more agile with making these decisions in a more effective manner or in a quicker manner? Any sort of key tips?
Yeah, move decision making as close to the end of the line as possible, as close to the customer interaction. Don't have 27 layers of approval for a decision that could be made by somebody really close to the edge. Take ideas from things like beyond budgeting or lean portfolio management, where we're talking about empowering the people all the way through the value stream to make the decisions as quickly as possible, and then convey the information. So put in good communication structures so that the people steering the ship are really hearing what's really going on. In most organizations, project reporting is a watermelon. It's green on the outside and on the inside it's red, but nobody's telling you. And probably in the middle there, it's actually totally rotten and we can't see it and nobody's even looking at it. How do we make And we mentioned the safe to fail concept earlier on as well. The need to not, if something's not going to work, it's not because of the people, it's because something's not going to work. So let's empower the people to make good decisions and trust them. And this goes back to Deming in the 50s. This predates any of the branded agile approaches.
Nice, nice. Thank you, Shane. Now, I think a lot of people, just on that sort of final note, Agile has been very much polished in the last few years, but you're right, some of these sort of principles are going back many, many years. So they're not too foreign to what we would call potentially traditional project program portfolio delivery.
But don't you think, Mike, that the problem with Agile, I guess a holistic thing, even though it's 50 odd years, as Shane rightly reminds us, the problem with Agile is the word Agile. I think it's been, when you boil it right back, and I think Shane's opening comment about what Agile is, just nailed it perfectly. But yet, as practitioners, as society, as a profession, we seem to make it a lot more complicated than really it is. It's all about being adaptive and having leadership and empowering people. Shane, thank you for saying that. It's about empowering people so that people can make decisions and move at speed. You can call that left-handed basket weaving for all I care, but at least you have to do that, and allow people to move forward.
That's great. I think you've heard it here tonight, team, that just start saying your organization is doing left-handed basket weaving and you're going to new heights. That'll be gold. Thanks. That's a great, and it's a very good point, right? Why aren't organizations doing this? Why aren't we making this the simplest way possible to change direction as early as possible to make sure we are focusing on the right value rather than sort of waiting for a financial year to end, because that's just the way our organizations split up into chunks, That's really good. Thank you. Question for you, Keith. Where do you see either program management or portfolio management going in the future? What are we not getting right today that we as an industry or a profession need to, I guess, improve on in the future? What's hot topics?
Oh, how long have you got?
You've got 3 minutes.
Okay. Well, I'm sort of constantly amazed that we don't sort of teach project management skills at a lot earlier age. Having spent a lot of time in universities, pretty much every discipline teaches the technical subjects like electrical engineering or architecture or medical stuff. And then people go out, it takes them 2 years to become kind of productive in industry, and then maybe takes another 5 years to become proficient enough to be called a project leader or project manager. And I think there's always the inclination that you make a lot of mistakes. It's a little bit like golf, really, that you learn bad habits because you haven't been trained from the earliest particular point, and after that, golf is kind of retraining yourself out of bad habits. So I think if we want to really attack this problem at the root cause, you need to make sure that education starts as early as possible so that we don't launch ourselves off into industry with a whole collection of bad habits.
Nice one. I said the other day to another similar panel like this that it'd be great if our school kids said, when I grow up, I want to be a project manager. So if we can, all 200 people on the call tonight, if we can speak to our children, if we have children, or other people's children, if it's not too awkward, just sell them the role of the project management profession, that'd be gold. You do me a favor.
It was actually interesting. I did hear about a survey this week about school kids getting asked what they would like to do when they grow up. Would anyone like to take a guess as to what number 1 came in at?
Oh. Is it a hot topic around COVID?
No.
Okay.
No surprises. It's a sports person, more than likely a rugby person, but number 2 was a YouTube influencer. and to the point about where we're going in the future, with COVID, of course, things have to be done more virtually, and it's a big part of being a project manager or a program manager is communication. And I think we really need to think about how we're going to do that into the future under the current restrictions. Adopting the new technologies like Microsoft Teams and things like that, video calling, because before this. Video calling wasn't something I really like to do. I'd much rather do face-to-face, but some people are, we just have to do it because still will need to get that communication even more so on it.
This is great, right? It gives us the opportunity to share your guys' views on an online platform tonight. And, Zoom's a pretty mature product and has matured a lot more in the last few months with COVID, just like many other online platforms are. So it does become less of a hassle delivering online. So it's great. Ian, your views on what's happening in the future in this space?
Well, I live in hope that, portfolio management will get elevated upwards. And I look, again, having said that, there's huge opportunities for portfolio management to elevate upwards and have a focus around organizational performance and organizational priority, and influence the strategic conversations and the selection of value, determining and selection of value initiatives that are going to be invested in, both from an OPEX as well as a CAPEX point of view. I think in order to do that, the comment, again, going back to Shane's comment about empowering people, reskilling people, I know, John, I think you touched on that as well. I think we need to change the mindset and the habit that we have from years and years behind us. I think the VUCA world, as I reference it, is going to move or make us move much more quickly than we've ever done in the past, and perhaps embrace risk more than we've perhaps done in the past, which means wise heads need to be having sensible conversations that needs to be anchored around something. And to me, that needs to be anchored around value. And the best people to do that is portfolio management individuals or skills or teams or whatever one wants to call them. I think that, to me, is a future that I can almost reach out and touch. I think it paves the way for excellence in continued excellence in program of work and project delivery functions. If we can address the front end, the top end, get that sorted out. Again, referencing back the Economist Intelligence Unit, 74% failure. If we can address that, then we can look at the project and program management profession as a whole, delivering an exciting future to all the organizations that are represented here tonight, and those who are not, for that matter.
Absolutely. Nice one. Thanks, Ian. Shane, I know you've got to disappear in 8 minutes' time. So just one question from the audience, followed by a second question before you head away. One was, someone's very keen, Koshiki is very keen to ask your opinion on scaled agile frameworks, particularly its applicability to the public sector.
Scaled Agile Framework is one model for structuring a large program of work. If you have a very large program of work that requires coordination and across many, many teams, then Scaled Agile Framework may be an applicable approach. And it applies to any framework. Make sure that you're applying the framework to the context of the organization, not the other way around. Use the minimum viable process for any particular context. If you are coordinating work that requires 1,000 people to be working simultaneously on IT products, then something like Scaled Agile Framework makes sense. One of the things I would challenge is that in New Zealand, we don't have many of that true scale of projects and products. Even in our financial institutions, we tend to be doing smaller streams of work where a more portfolio view and smaller teams, where we know that small teams, and there are studies that in that space where small teams can be effective, they are going to be more effective if they're given a set of constraints and guides and told to go and figure out the best way to do it. Now, any one of the Agile brands will give you some guidance on that, but it's the mindset and philosophy that comes first. So please choose your framework for your context, not the context for the framework.
Indeed. And then, so a follow-up question around guidance, and I'm going to ask all four panelists this: your thoughts on advice for additional support, additional information on these subjects tonight, and maybe some your opinion on some of the certifications available. I mean, where to next for people?
I'm gonna do the plug. I work for a certification body, the International Consortium for Agile, and we have certifications that cover product and delivery management and enterprise transformation and so forth, in all with an Agile perspective. And we have a number of member organizations in New Zealand.
Thanks, Shane. John, your thoughts on additional support, advice, training, or certifications in this space?
Absolutely. Look, I mean, if you haven't got your CAPM or PMP, I would certainly advise you to go and look at that. Additionally, continue to join these type of network events. It's a great source of information, and also a great way of networking and getting to know people. And of course, talk to your colleagues. I'm sure for those that are in larger organizations, at least, there are lots and lots of experienced people that have probably encountered the problems you have several times before. So no problem is unique. And just talk to people, ask questions. There's no harm in asking.
Thanks, John. No, very good advice. Ian.
Yeah, thank you. A couple of things spring to mind, and I better be consistent with something I said a couple of weeks ago. And maybe a mute point, certifications versus qualifications. I kind of have a little bit of an issue regarding a sort of popular trend we've seen around the world in the last decade or two about chasing certifications, qualifications, bits of paper even. In my business experience, I'm not always convinced that those things actually deliver the sort of result that one expects or needs to see. I think, though, if we take it back to the portfolio program of work context, I think all of us who aspire towards, or people who aspire towards those higher roles, more influencing roles, should look to, one, gain work experience, of course, embellish their skills further through that, maybe add a qualification on there, a business-oriented qualification rather than, the latest hot thing, whatever that might be. But I would also add, if I may, the opportunity to find one or more mentors, as opposed to coaches, mentors to assist he or she move forward, to have a dialogue with, and that's what mentoring is about. It's about a conversation, about perspective, so that he or she then gradually rounds out and hones an overarching skill set that's leaning towards a kind of more business strategic context that then can be applied in a portfolio or EPMO setting, for that matter. And let's not forget the EPMO settings. To me, I think that would be a start point, good start point.
Magic. Thanks, Ian. And I 100% agree with your point on the value of a mentor. Speaking from personal experience, it's really helped me grow in my profession. So if anyone's looking for a mentor, please do reach out to your networks, to PMI, and I'm sure there'll be someone out there who's got the time to help get you where you want to get to. Keith, final thoughts from you on next steps and additional support and advice?
Oh, okay. Well, I guess no surprise that, as far as I'm concerned, there's no substitute for experience. I think we've heard that these portfolio managements are kind of involve a great deal of heavy lifting. They're sort of multidisciplinary, and it's very easy to continue to go down a sort of project management route in a certain organization. But at some stage, you need to realize, I need to get out and run a business, simply because you're surrounded by businesses. It's what makes projects work. They're all sat inside businesses. You need to get out there and do some sales, some marketing, and some commercial work, some negotiating. So, it's like a 20-year apprenticeship, really, a 20-year professional apprenticeship before someone's going to give you a multi-million pound, couple of $100 million to go play with on a portfolio. So I think, you know, the best advice I can give is to look at a portfolio manager, a successful portfolio manager, look at the kind of skills that he or she has got, the kind of experience that they've accumulated in their professional career, and then try and emulate that and have the courage to move from job to job within the same company, or have the courage to move from company to company to accumulate all the skills that you think you'll need to be a professional portfolio manager.
Super. Thank you, Keith. Well, bang on 8 o'clock. So being a good project manager that I like to be, let's keep us to schedule. Hey, look, I just want to thank all of the panelists tonight. We've had a huge wealth of experience share their thoughts. Shane has had to drop off. He did have another appointment starting right now. So yeah, thank you, Shane, for being here. Ian, Keith, John, we very much do appreciate your time tonight, and I'm sure everyone has got something out of it. I think I've captured most of the questions in the chat. If there's any other questions you would like to ask, even though we're out of time, quickly put them in the chat. We'll grab those and we'll send them to the panelists following this for them to answer via email. We'll capture all this information up, the recording of tonight's session, and there'll be an email going out to you in the next couple of days or so, just with a nice little summary of tonight's event. So again, thank you everyone for joining in. Thank you to our panelists. Thank you to PMI for putting on Project Management Awareness Month. We hope you have enjoyed your evening tonight, and do check out, there is plenty more events, plenty more action coming your way across this month. Sharon, can I just hand over to you for any sort of closing remarks?
I don't think there's anything I can add. You said it all, but it's great to see so many of you here tonight. Great to see the cameras on, and I'm sure that the panelists really appreciate being able to see who they're talking to, and it just goes to show how far people have come with using technology and being more comfortable with it. But yeah, do come to some of our webinars. They get better and better every time we have one, and I'm really looking forward to next week. Thanks for coming.
Good. Thanks for joining in, everybody. Thanks, Mike. Thanks,
Thanks, team.
Thank you.
Thank you.